Hello and welcome to the Improvised Star Trek panel on cosplay in the world of Star Trek and radio. We are the Improvised Star Trek. We run a podcast that is not the traditional kind of podcast. It is a narrative podcast. It's more like a radio play. And we inhabit a world that is the world of Star Trek: The Next Generation, but we live on a ship that is not the Enterprise. It is in fact called the USS Sisyphus. And we draw from Star Trek for inspiration for all of our characters and plots, but we don't have specific characters from the world of Star Trek that we play. So our captain is named Captain Julius Valentine Baxter, and his first officer here is Corbomite Hayes, played by Chris Rathjen. Our engineer is named Fritz Fassbender. He's a Belgian who killed his mother as a child.
I think he's Prussian.
Is he Prussian? Okay. I think that's an affectation myself. Our chief of security is Lieutenant Lady Cola, who was raised in the Ferengi, on Ferenginar,
yeah,
the Ferengi Empire, Trade Empire, whatever they're called. I play Ensign Charles Loram, who's a Trill, and has kind of internal struggles with his symbiote at some points. And we also have the science officer Crick Watson, played by Sean Kelly, and Crick Watson was raised on the moon, like Dr. Crusher. And who else is in our cast?
Dr. Zarlene
Zonelson.
Zoomin from Zerth.
Planet Zerth.
Played by Mary Kay Walthall, who
That's-
is currently in Berlin studying to be a clown.
Studying to be a clown.
Yeah,
Professionally.
professionally. That's
yeah.
actually a thing.
It really is a true, awesome
Yeah.
thing that she's doing.
It's really awesome.
So we basically make up stories in the world of Star Trek. We make them up.
We're so close. Julia Weiss
And
is
Julia
our
Weiss, sorry.
communications officer, who is in many ways more a counselor than
Yeah, she's a communications officer who really wants people to communicate. She's not really concerned about opening hailing frequencies so much as getting people to divulge their innermost feelings and really get at what the core of communication is. So that's our regular cast, and we just get together on Sundays and make up an episode of Star Trek. Like I said, drawn and inspired from the world of Star Trek: The Next Generation primarily, and of course that includes the original series because that's our history if we're set in that universe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Eric Scull, who is also an editor of the podcast, puts a lot of effort into making the podcast sound great, and is a producer for us as well, helping us organize things like this. So take it away, Eric.
All right. So originally, I envisioned this panel for main stage, where it's basically climb up some stairs to get up, and this, that, the other thing. So with your permission, I'm just going to keep going ahead.
Yeah.
With that, I have an old intro monologue here. All right, here we go. At 0900 this morning, we received a communication from the 24th century. Crew members from the United Spaceship Sisyphus have traveled backward through time. And for once, they haven't landed in the Renaissance or the 1990s. Some of you may be familiar with their exploits as documented on the Improvised Star Trek podcast, or you may have even seen them perform on stage here in Chicago. This morning, we'll be taking a deeper look at Improvised Star Trek, its humble existence as a fan production, the multiple television series that have inspired it, improvisation as an art form, and more. But first, please let me welcome today's panelists. Now, as a Trill, this navigation officer has inhabited the bodies of multiple men and women, and loved every single minute of it. Newly appointed Lieutenant Charles Loram, the ever-playful Nick Wagner.
Hello, thank you. Thank you.
Next, this chief of security while aboard the Sisyphus has had her share of quirks. She always dresses the part, and when she wants to be, is also the captain's girlfriend. Lieutenant Commander Lady Cola, the incomparable Irene Marquette.
Woo!
And finally, it's time for the bravest and most honorable member of the Sisyphus crew, he thinks, named after one of Captain James T. Kirk's most deft maneuvers. Commander Corbomite Hayes, our number one, Chris Rathjen!
Yeah.
and shtick.
Stick accomplishment.
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Hey, crew.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you all this morning?
Great.
We
How are
got
you?
mimosas. We're doing great.
Yeah. Oh my god. So welcome to ChiFi Con. It's going to be bound to be a good weekend in Chicago for geeks, nerds, everybody up in space, all of that. So it's pretty exciting. This is the first of 2 panels for Improvised Star Trek this weekend. The second is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And in this panel, we'll be talking about improvisation and how it's used to create art, to create the Improvised Star Trek. Now, up to this point, believe it or not, everything I've said has been scripted. Written in advance, planned, measured, cut, just a little bit. This, however, is not the realm in which Improvised Star Trek inhabits. As a troupe, the 3 of you and 4 others create completely unplanned, unscripted, and original performances for both the show and the podcast. Tell me, how do you do it?
Well, Eric, that's a great question. So we have been improvising together now for 5 years. Well, I think we've actually probably been in various combinations improvising for longer than that. But the group coalesced around Star Trek 5 years ago when a live show was put together at I/O, and when its run finished about 10 months later, we decided to regroup as a podcast, and now we get together on Sunday mornings. We get some croissants and some mimosas, and we record new adventures and then produce them as a radio play.
Yeah. So we're all veteran improvisers. I think it's safe to say at this point of the Chicago improv scene, and the Chicago improv scene is the improv scene. I think it's safe to say at this point. So basically, we went through classes at I/O, formerly Improv Olympic, at Annoyance Theater, at Second City, probably some of us did, and have been, taking part in the Chicago improv scene for years before we got together to do Star Trek. And the world of long-form improv is basically centered around the idea that magic happens in the moment, and you can perform without a script, just by feeding off of each other and the things that you say in the moment, and having real interactions, real communication with each other, real emotional reactions to what each other's saying, and then it will make an interesting and oftentimes quite funny product. So that's improv, and that's how we do that part.
Yeah, improv.
Yeah.
Can I talk about it?
Yes,
for a
oh,
second?
please. I'm going to make sure this is recording.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great.
Sweet.
Can you rephrase the question? Can you?
Yeah. So the question was, when we talk about improv, we're talking more specifically about long-form improv. I assume now, for being improvised, there are still rules or guidelines to follow while improvising that help hone the performance into gold?
Yeah. So we all are. We've been performing as improvisers in various iterations before we got together as Improvised Star Trek. And I should also say that we rehearsed for a long time before we actually did our stage show. And there are...
But Irene, I thought it was improvised.
It is improvised, but like anything that you do, it's a skill set, and listening is a skill, and being able to pick up on the importance of what we say to each other is a skill. Building on that, that's like the basics of what we do and how we do it.
I liken it to a sports team, actually, because a game of, say, basketball is improvised, right? I mean, they don't know what they're going to do until they're doing it. It's all in reaction to something that just happened. But you have to practice in order to have the skills necessary to react appropriately or in the best way possible to whatever just happened. So when we say rehearsal, it's more like practice, like a sport
Yes. But since it's theater, we can stay rehearsal.
We can say rehearsal. we
Just the improv.
Yeah, hell yeah, come on
Hey,
in.
welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, there we go. Nice one.
If you're just joining us, this is a conversation with the cast members of Improvised Star Trek, who improvise weekly new episodes of Star Trek with their own fictional crew and cast in space, set during the time of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So now you've just talked about about improv and some guidelines and rules and that kind of thing.
Well, if we could go into a few specifics
yes,
of what
please,
those
let's
rules are.
talk specifics.
The rules are meant to be broken. We'll say that right off the top. So, nothing's set in stone with improv, obviously. But one of the guidelines that helps, just for the uninitiated, is that you don't want to deny what someone just said. You want to add to it. So, if for example we start an episode with Captain Baxter, Matt Young, saying "shields up, red alert," then probably the next person should say something like, "Sir, the Romulans are decloaking off port bow," something like that, rather than, "Sir, what are you talking about? There's no one out there." That's a denial. That's saying that what you just said about us being, you obviously were implying we're in a battle situation. If you say there's no one out there, then that's kind of denying that reality.
Unless we're starting an episode about how Captain Baxter is suffering from
Dementia.
then we could fold that in and make it. It's also
Exactly.
Justifying is a big part of improv. Saying yes, building on it. There's a lot of different ways to say yes in terms of improv. We say yes to the reality of the situation. We say yes to knowing each other and caring about each other. Once we kind of get in those situations, if somebody says "shields up" and the other person's like, "Why nobody's out there?" then we can find out why nobody's out there, and he said that. We take everything as truth, line by line by line, and then it's deciding why those things are true and how they're true. And we don't really know we don't necessarily know what it's all about until it's all over. Hopefully we are thinking about it as we go. It's kind of it's like lucid dreaming.
Right.
You see what you're doing, and you've got control within it, but you're also part of this wave that's
Lucid dreaming, that's a great analogy.
Thank
I've
you
never
so
thought of that
much.
before, but that's true.
I got that. We got basketball.
Yeah, I gotta come up with some killer metaphor.
You're next, Chris. You're next.
It's like a road trip. No, it's not.
It is.
It is like a road
If
trip.
you're
I know
only
it is.
watching it through the rearview mirror.
Ooh.
You're killing me.
I can't take credit for that last one, but lucid dreaming is all me.
Read with the assists.
Like a road trip, and that there's an A story and a B story.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted
And,
to talk about
snacks.
that. Yeah, and snacks. And snacks. We already talked about the snacks.
Oh,
We'll probably go back to them later. So now, improv has some rules, or rather a formula, that can be adjusted as needed, and so does Star Trek. In many of their more episodic series and episodes that are standalone, there's a formula, usually involving maybe an A storyline, B storyline, things that Chris just mentioned. So I wanted to ask, did you, as an improvised team, have to mold into that formula, or did you move it? What formula is at play when you're improvising an episode of Star Trek?
I actually think there wasn't. We did have a lot of fine tuning to do because especially when we moved from the live show to the podcast, because the time period was different, and we didn't have to do pauses for audience reactions anymore. But actual things like multiple storylines, that's already part of long-form improv.
Yeah, it turns out that's just kind of part of good storytelling.
Yeah.
And long-form improv adopted that as well. As
Yeah. If you go to see a show at Improv Olympic, their signature form is the Herald, which is 3 storylines that eventually tie together. So to apply that to Star Trek was pretty easy, especially if you've got someone dealing with Romulans decloaking off the port bow. And then you can switch to the B story, which is someone listless because they haven't been promoted in a while, and and their popsicle stick house fell down that they were working on, and and they're just having a bad day.
This is just an example, but we will use this.
Yeah. But so you can have like someone's emotional, personal journey be like what they care about for the episode, and then as time goes on, it will start to tie into the larger plots that are happening.
So the popsicle stick house saves the day.
Right.
It's got to.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And as I could be way wrong about this, but I sort of recall when we were rehearsing before that live show that there was a conversation about the structure of Star Trek episode, which is just like a basic television structure, something like we all kind of recognize, and you see it in everything from like a 30 Rock episode to Scandal to, you know,
there's like that opening bit where it's like the culprit or something happened, and then it's credits, and then you know,
and then
a new element is introduced, and then we can kind of go back and forth between those.
Yeah, I think one thing from Star Trek that has been a little hard to bring on is that a certain percentage of Star Trek stories are actually mysteries, where it's a surprise of what's causing this thing. And improv is kind of dependent on everyone kind of being on the same page, or at least ready to be on the same page. So I've noticed that the episodes that are perhaps the most struggle is when we're trying to avoid figuring out what's going on to have it match a Star Trek story. We eventually kind of tried to abandon that move because it's you need to know what you're reacting to, and if it's a situation where, and you also want to be acting as immediately as possible. So kind of deferring things on the logic, like, oh, this isn't revealed till the third act, like that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think demonstrates a really good difference between improv and a scripted show, where you can play with like the not knowing, because everybody on board already knows because it's in the script. But it really doesn't. It doesn't really take us anywhere when we are like willfully ignorant of something that's happening. The way you have to be like for a mystery to like get it on the open and like deal with it. Although we have had our share of Scooby-Doo endings.
We have. I think we eventually got to the point that we could nail those, but those I think were the biggest struggle early on. It was like, well, no, and I think I remember it specifically because when we started doing the show, I went back and started watching Next Gen episodes again, and some of my favorite ones are essentially mysteries where, it turns out it was a time hole all along, and like, you don't know it's a time hole, you just know weird stuff is happening to Beverly.
Right.
So
which could be anything.
Which could be anything.
Like, why is she calling for the shields to ring?
Right.
So that was just realizing that you needed to be a little more careful, and that was a situation where good Star Trek and good improv could be made to work together, but it was definitely required a little more finesse.
Yeah. And going back to the A story, B story thing, we do sometimes kind of forget to do a B story, and it's like we're all on the bridge, and then we all go down to the planet, and then we all like go into some temple and see what's going on, and we all go back to the ship. It's like, it doesn't work very well. Occasionally we pull it off, but it doesn't work very well.
Those episodes work, for those episodes to work at all, it needs to be, those are zany episodes.
Yes.
Because when every scene has 8 people in it, it's just everyone like escalating their jokes, and there's a real danger of the show kind of overheating.
Which I think is what our most recently released episode was kind of that way, wasn't it?
Scull.
Scull.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
It's almost a joke of, oh, I'm coming too.
Yeah, we're all coming.
The transporter guy who beamed them over is also coming, like by accident.
There is a 6-minute scene that is, in our most recently published podcast episode, there's a 6-minute scene of everyone getting to the same transporter room. And this particular instance, it worked and was funny, but that can also be a train wreck, and it can be, it worked because we managed to find some vaudeville in that instance.
Yeah.
But the logistics of travel can often be an unfunny thing. So.
If anyone knows who drove down here this morning.
Oh gosh, yeah, Wabash was closed. Now, there's something else too, which is that improv, a lot of the improv that's happening in Chicago is over and done, quick, forever. It's a temporary thing, it exists in the moment, and I believe it's supposed to. However, with the Improvised Star Trek, you've managed to immortalize not only the craft, but the performance that's coming out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit and what that's like to see improv continue to exist after the lights have gone down?
It's real weird. I mean, it isn't anymore, but it was at first, I really feel like. Because you can't even record improv well.
No, it doesn't translate
It doesn't translate. The only good example that I know, well, of course, the Christopher Guest movies are largely improvised, but they're improvising around a structure that they have.
And they are heavily edited.
Yeah, and they're heavily edited. Yeah. And then there's that movie about TJ and Dave.
Yeah, but that's so contextualized.
Yeah.
I think...
It's true, yeah, they provide the context for it in the film itself.
Yeah, in general, it just doesn't. That's why, like, Whose Line Is It Anyway, I think is probably the best example of
Mhm.
improv, because it's the most, like, manageable, and it's the most,
short
like...
chunks.
It's short chunks, it's, like, able to be filmed. It's the kind of thing, if you're flipping through and you, like, catch Wayne Brady saying something crazy, it, like, makes you laugh for a second. You're like, oh, what is this? And, you know, what is great about long form is truly happening in the moment. It's also, like, the joy of watching people figure it out in a moment.
Yeah.
Like, I think Bill Arnett always says it's the show of the show that you're
Yes.
watching when you're in the audience. So I have never liked watching my own improv performances, and there will be
That's
people
weird.
who like shoot your shows and then will come up and like give you a disc afterwards.
You're like,
And
"Duh!"
Thanks. I can't wait for this to like some dust. And it's not that I
Right.
don't appreciate it. It's just like the thought of watching myself come up with that like joke I thought was
Right.
so
Which-
amazing in the
right.
moment.
And which everyone agreed was amazing in the moment. Everyone in the room thought was amazing in the moment.
But like it
Yeah.
takes some of that sparkle off.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think
That certainly does.
Matt, who plays our captain, explained it. I heard him explain it well once. It's sort of like a magic trick. Like it's impressive that it happens in front of you. I've also compared it to like walking a tightrope. You don't want someone to fall to their death, but the fact that they might gives you a little bit of like a jolt when you're watching them perform.
Yeah.
And that's like a lot of the magic of improv, and that's something that, yeah, it's pretty easy to lose when you bottle it.
So part of the interesting thing that happened when we started doing the podcast, we also, so we stick mics on ourselves and we sit around in a room and we record. But then we go and we edit the episode minimally. We take out pauses and any jokes that we don't like. And then we add in sound effects. And that gives it a finished kind of nature to it. You listen to an episode of the podcast, and it no longer really feels improvised. Now, I think we're all kind of ambivalent about that. For one thing, a lot of people don't know what improv really is, and don't really understand that we actually are making everything up that we say. Because even people who come see the live show at the IO Theater will come up to us afterwards and say, well, you had to have had some of that planned out, right? I mean, certainly this part was planned out. And it's not. We weren't. We didn't.
Yeah, we know who we are and we
Yeah.
know how we feel about each other, and
Right.
we've got like parameters that we work in, but other than that, it is all made up.
Made
So
up.
just like in our lives, we have an endless amount of ways that we interact with people that we know in different situations. It's the same with these characters.
Yeah.
And I think like not having to establish who we are and how we feel every time probably helps with that
Yes.
polish a lot.
Yes.
But when things get tied together in a way that like you almost can't even write because
Right.
you're too
Oh,
like
yeah.
analytical about it.
Yeah.
When somebody says something and it like inspires something else, and then it all like weaves back in, you're like, oh, that's the magic of improv.
Yeah. There are definitely moments in the podcast that could not have been written because someone would have said, no, that won't work.
Yeah,
You know, and
it's
it
just like
does work.
a bunch of people being truly collaborative
Yeah.
and like in the moment.
Yeah. But, so the podcast itself as a product, I think, works regardless of whether you understand that it's improvised. And I think that's kind of important because of the medium itself. Because if you just tuned in on, you're like, oh, I'll check out this podcast, Star Trek thing. And it was just the improv, it would feel unfinished. It would be like watching a video of improv. Which we've just said does not feel right, doesn't work right. But adding that level of polish makes it feel finished. It makes it feel like a set piece that we intended to be as it is.
It feels like you're on a ship that we've grown to love from watching the series. It feels like you're really on a ship in the 24th century in that universe.
Yeah.
And with the series that's so enduring and popular, they have, fortunately, those sounds that have been used on the show have been made available. And are available, and that's what we use in the podcast. So we're using the actual transporter sound, the actual door sound when we're on the bridge background sound.
And I think it enhances the show if you know that it's improvised. And we try to give people kind of a peek behind the scenes as much as possible. Every other week we do a bonus scene that usually has some laughter in it. It's unedited. You can hear the people in the background, the rest of the cast laughing at each other and stuff like that.
Which we spend a great deal of time scrubbing out in the episode proper.
Yeah. So that's there to kind of remind people we really are making this up on the spot. And if you listen to an episode with that in mind, I think you get a lot even more out of it than
I do want to say, like, there was as much as it's weird for improv to be lasting. It also has been very interesting what has sort of what extra fun things we have found doing kind of extra long form. When we first started doing the live show 5 years ago, we would regularly make Star Trek references by making up things that had happened to our characters. Remember when I was, I had that professor with all those eyes or whatever. Now that we've been doing this long enough, we actually have backstory. We have 5 years of missions. And so when we want to reference something, we can reference something that actually happened to our characters. And the advantage to that is that the other people on stage also remember when that happened. So they can actually call you out on your misrepresenting how that happened, which is a way of agreeing while still denying, but still actually be having agreement of what the reality is. And it's very interesting because in an improv show, usually if this character that you've created will cease to exist at the end of the show, you can take them to their logical conclusion and ramp it up to 11. We do that, and then we need to come back next week and still have our jobs. I betrayed you all for a chance to be a space god, and now I need to sit in a conference room meeting with you awkwardly the next day because it didn't work out. And
that's some of the fun of a big part of the fun of this for me too is just exploring the mundane realities of these lives and the after effects of stuff like that. The things that you never see on a show, on a television show, because it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
You don't want to see those guys when the plumbing is backed up, or whatever. But for us, that sort of thing is where the real fun.
Yeah, exactly. we get to play in this world that we're all familiar with because we all because we watch the shows, but we get to see another side of it. And really the fundamental concept of the show is, well, the Enterprise is the best ship in the fleet, obviously. They keep saving everybody else out there, but there's got to be a not best ship in the fleet then, right? And what does that look like? They're just kind of okay. They're just kind of okay at their jobs. They get the mission done somehow, sometimes. Not exactly the cleanest way possible, and what do the bathrooms look like?
I feel like there was an episode where the Sisyphus was ordered to return for dry dock, decommissioned.
Dry dock is the worst kind of dock.
But anyway, I wanted to talk about the characters because there are certain Star Trek tropes, right? There's the outsider. There's any number of different characters that have character types that have endured across the series. So how does Improvised Star Trek adhere or add to or completely detract from that in their 7-person crew? Although 7-person, it's important to note that there's many more characters because each of you play multiple characters.
And I think the cast is actually 8, right?
Oh, is it 8?
Yeah,
it is 8.
And but
it's so rare that all 8 are around at the same time. So,
so the regular crew of the Sisyphus is in the 20s probably, just from everyone playing multiple characters and everything. We did make a conscious effort to adopt some of those tropes. And in fact, when I joined the show, my character was originally human, assumed to be human, I think. I guest starred on the show a few times, and I just was like a normal dude and everything, so I was human. But at that time, we didn't have any aliens on the crew. And of course, you've got to have an alien. It's Star Trek. That's the whole thing. You know, you got to have at least one alien. So we kind of retconned my character into being Trill, just to fit that. And he was already the outsider in a lot of ways, so that works. But then we play with those tropes too. The communications officer who really wants to get people to communicate that's a different take on the trope of a communications officer and or a counselor.
Our captain, Captain Baxter, Matt says that he is a Kirk-type captain in a Picard-type world. He's trying to be a swashbuckler when in fact you need to, read Shakespeare and be able to
Yes. He is not a Renaissance man.
Yeah. I think when I kind of formulated my character, I took a bunch of pieces and he didn't quite turn out the way I thought he was going to be. I'm very happy with who Corbin Hayes is now, but I actually kind of started with the name, and I wanted kind of a spacey name. And so I took the last name of a U.S. president and the spaciest thing I could think of, which was Corbomite from the Corbomite maneuver. And then I was like, well, how can I justify this? Because we do try to be in world. We don't want our characters to know they're making jokes about Star Trek. We want that to be their world. So I was like, well, the Corbomite maneuver is history in the world of Star Trek. It's a military maneuver.
Study it in academy, probably, right?
So I made my parents admirals who were big Kirk fans. So they are they're into military history. They're very proud of Starfleet, and both of them are admirals. And so they named me after a famous Kirk maneuver.
And
no pressure.
Yeah, right. That's when we really started having fun with Corbomite as a character, because it's like, this dude's got 2 admirals for parents, and he's a commander on the worst ship. He's the first officer on the worst ship in the fleet. Who is this guy? Like they have to have pulled strings to even get him this far, you know?
Yes, they did. But I also didn't want to think of like being raised in that environment. I didn't want to be like an outright idiot, and I didn't want to be kind of cynical about Starfleet. Like, my character really loves Starfleet. He really believes in the Federation. He really thinks it's the greatest civilization in history, and that it does nothing but good things everywhere it goes. He buys it. So then to kind of reconcile that with what I ended up seeing day to day in our episodes, and kind of the messes we would get in, and the questionable ways the ways we would often fail, or when we would succeed, it would be questionably. I ended up becoming kind of like a naive character, like a very good at convincing himself that, like, sometimes you gotta bend the rules, when in fact all we do is bend the rules.
Right.
And sort of this kind of wide-eyed naivete that, like, no, this is how you get the good stuff done.
But even that is in world. Like, Corbomite thinks, the greatest captains in history, they have to bend the rules. Kirk did it, Picard did it, so he's convinced himself that that's what Captain Baxter is doing too.
Yeah.
It's not. He's just not very good at his job.
Yeah.
But Corbomite's, he's one of the best. He's right up there, bending that prime directive as necessary.
And then I worked out a whole backstory where I knew Riker at the Academy, and then that's actually played very little into the way the show has worked.
What does Riker think of Corbomite?
He doesn't.
Riker is vaguely aware that Corbomite is a person.
But to Corbo, Riker is...
Oh, they were pretty good friends.
Yeah.
For Lady Cola, because I was one of the original members, and I was the only woman for a long time
Years, yeah.
with this, and I spent a lot of time watching Star Trek, and I was an actor in the Star Trek experience in Las Vegas, and I have my own, like, very strong feminist ideas. So when I approached this, I wanted to have a character that like really honored the progressive example that Roddenberry set, and I think he was like so socially amazing with this show and the world that he presented. And I feel like that is also in conflict with like how objectified so many of those female characters are, while also being really strong and in like positions of power. And I think that that's a very interesting dichotomy and like part of just having a television show and like what it means to put women on television in positions of power. So I wanted to have a character that like internalized all of those ideas and was like truly fucked up by them. And I heightened that more by putting her as a human who was on Ferenginar. Like, my parents are capitalists. My last name is Cola because that's like what our family made. Yeah, we were the Cola Wars, and they named me Lady. Like everything. And me like going to Starfleet was a rebellion against my family. Like I'm rejecting their capitalism. I'm gonna wear clothes unlike my mother. I'm gonna like be outside of my house and not pre-chew my husband's food. So like all of those things together made for like a really complicated person, and people would say like, we never know what Lady Cola's gonna do, and like for some reason it always made perfect sense to me. And it has always been a lot of fun to play, and even when she's awful, and she's done some like really awful things on the show, and to like people that she likes, and it all kind of stems from like having her identity being pulled in all of these different ways, and being told so much, being part of a system that really tells her what she can do, but who she has to be while she's doing it, and how she kind of like, you know, stretches out of those molds.
Yeah, I do really love like that tension in Star Trek where it is, on paper it's supposed to be this incredibly progressive egalitarian society, but it was written by people from the 1960s and the 1980s, and so it doesn't quite, even now we're already looking at certain episodes and I'm like, I know you meant well, but that's not good. How do you handle that?
Yeah, isn't there, I saw some GIF the other day, the other day where Kirk...
Peanut butter?
So where he like kisses some woman and then he slaps her right across the face afterwards. It's like, hey, that's Kirk. That's just the time, baby.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought. I mean, you're talking about a series that had a woman on the bridge.
Oh,
and the first interracial kiss on TV, I think.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And then also in the same breath, or actually, 20 years later, had Troy's catsuit.
Right.
Oh yeah.
For seasons.
Right.
Well, I mean, and just I also love like when I think of Nichelle Nichols and how incredible it is that her character was on TV and in a position of power, and like she's also wearing the shortest skirt ever, and she's just like walking around that bridge showing off her body, and it's like, I love that. I love it, and like, I know that is the requirement, or like whatever sexual politics of the time make those two things come together. Yeah. It's like very satisfying for an audience. I think we all agree, like, who doesn't love a strong woman in a really short skirt? But like, what does that do to our brains?
We were recording that, right?
Got it. So yeah, that's sort of like that really informed a lot of for me how I played with that character, and I really have failed you all so hard because I really don't play a lot of other characters.
I don't either.
That's what I wanted to talk about next. So we were talking about your long-term characters, your sort of principal characters, and now I wanted to mention the one-offs that serve merely the story that exists. As soon as they're gone, or as soon as they're on, they're gone. Mm-hmm. We're talking about characters like Marcus and Larry, the turbo-lift ensign, or but then there's also like recurring but not quite principal characters like Dr. Forgo, this monster character. So how do you come up with them? How do you continue to create these characters, each with their own accent, each with their, where do they come from? Where does that...
I mean, honestly, I think you would have to... I feel like Matt Young and Griffin Eckstein really are just like work triple time to bust those characters out.
It's amazing.
It really is.
And they always give us 2.5 seconds for someone else to pick it up, and then they're like, okay, well, I guess it's me again.
Yeah. I guess I'm the corn dog vendor.
They're like scoping mapping out what needs to be
Yes.
done for the story.
and that's
Yeah.
Improv is about kind of like taking care of the scene.
Yeah.
Like,
Jump in.
Yeah, if you're going up and you're about to buy a corn dog. Who was the corn dog vendor in that bonus thing?
It was Joe and Matt.
Okay, yeah. So like if you're doing anything like, well, I'm going to buy this corn dog, someone needs to be like,
Corn dogs.
corn dogs,
Corn dogs.
yeah.
And it was you.
Oh, all right, corn
Yeah, all
dogs.
three of you jumped on what each other said. It was brilliant.
Oh, fantastic! Great, I'm glad to hear. But yeah, so for me at least, Griffin and Matt definitely take the lead, and I know like Griffin has talked about like Bugs Bunny like even being like an inspiration. Like,
Mhm.
Oh yeah, he loves Bugs Bunny.
Um,
I'm married to Griffin next to
and
It's like me those personal deeds.
I thought he was married to the ship.
So I think for me at least, I started doing what recurring characters I have because I would occasionally do a jump on, occasionally be a corn dog vendor or a science officer with a monster voice or something. And then like while I had internalized that my regular character would be continuing, most of those kind of fell away into, they were ephemera, they came and they went. And I think it's because I am one of the editors and I've edited the episodes and I was like, oh, that guy was funny, I like that guy, and I've been reminded that he can come back. So kind of that discovery of, well, look, if I've got to have someone deliver a line about science, why do I not just be the monster doctor that I was, a month ago that delivered a line about science when our science officer was otherwise engaged.
Yeah, and as you start adding little bits to each of those recurring characters, then you start getting a fuller picture. Like now we know that Dr. Fago, the monster alien in charge of astrometrics, I believe? Astrometrics.
But he does have a love of xenopodiatry.
Yes. He has a mouth that he can carry people around in, at least children.
Yeah.
He is a predator. His people
Yes.
were evolved from predators. So, don't get him too excited because he will chase you down and kill you.
He's no
Well, his society's rules on hunting are don't eat anything that knows it has a name.
Yes.
That's
ethics.
Yeah.
That's ethics for a predator.
Yeah. So those are like jokes that we make one off, and then because they exist forever now in the podcast, you remember them and they become.
Like one of...
See about pancakes.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, Pancakes Johnson.
We had a fantastic scene, a fantastic show where Lady Cola, who's our security officer, was doing the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah.
And randomly,
Speaking of doing terrible things.
yeah.
We had to find out.
Yeah. No, we didn't. We knew.
Those results are so old.
Yeah.
At that point.
But Matt Young just did a throwaway character of like the old jailbird, like the old guy who'd
Kind
been
of a
there.
sling blade guy.
Someone who'd been in prison for 30 years, even though starship breaks are supposed to be temporary. You're supposed to just take them to, a planet or something.
keto colony or something.
Yeah.
And he became one of our most, people love that guy because he's a former and maybe current murderer, but the only thing he cares about is getting a hot pancakes.
Wait, a whole mess of
A whole mess of pancakes. I didn't want to steal his line.
That's his line.
You should get him on a t-shirt. He did that character at a live show, and the response from the audience was tremendous.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the realization that people were coming from the podcast because they loved Pancakes Johnson, who's not really a Star Trek character. That's one of the fun things about so in Star Trek when you watch a show, the camera, such as it is only on Starfleet officers, but they're a tiny fraction of the world and the population. So to be reminded that there are still weirdos and criminals and everything else in the world of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry has just decided not to point a camera at them.
Well, except for I feel like Deep Space Nine is the start of that,
Yeah.
where you get to see kind of those like the dirty corners of
Yeah.
of what goes on. That to me is what is so. I love a dirty corner. That's what's so great about Deep Space Nine to me is that you
Yeah.
kind of start to like. You see that curtain pulled back a little bit on
Right.
the world, and we just pull it back further, and we find Pancakes Johnson.
A little bit further.
Just a little,
Yeah.
he's sitting back there, with his whole mess of pink.
We've talked about improv for a while now, and I will get back to it. But I want to ask you guys about Star Trek, about actual Star Trek. What's your favorite series, characters? How did you guys get into it? Perfect segue. Thanks for that. You would think this was planned. It's not.
It's not. That's the power of improv.
I think my favorite series is Next Gen, due to nostalgia. I have to admit, I think the best series is Deep Space Nine. I think it's smarter. I think it does more things. The Next Generation just has a very soft spot for me.
Yeah.
It's the Star Trek I grew up with. Deep Space Nine is the Star Trek that made me, I don't know, start thinking more about art and what stories you can tell. But
Yeah, I would. Go ahead.
Next Gen I watched with my mom. We watched all the movies together when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
that was like the time that Next Gen was on, and we watched all of that. And I didn't watch Deep Space Nine until I think we started doing the show, so probably like 5 years ago. And I was really surprised at how amazing it was. It's so special. I think so. Yeah, I would totally agree with what you said.
Yeah.
But I do love some of those movies,
Yeah.
even the bad ones.
The original series movies definitely are part of what drew me into Star Trek. The Captain Kirk with the thing, and the Khan and Search for Spock and all that stuff, and even the one with the whales I love.
Yeah.
I love it.
there's an even one with the whales. Everyone loves the one.
Everyone loves the one with the whales. I have a soft spot for the original series, actually. I was lucky enough to be just the right age where I was old enough to understand, or to not think it was boring, but young enough to not think that the special effects were terrible. It was on syndication, when I was, 11 or something, and started watching it then, and really, really enjoyed it. But then, of course, the Next Generation really implanted itself in my heart. But I didn't give Deep Space Nine a fair shake until recently as well, until we were doing the podcast, probably even later than that. And agree, upon watching it, that it is the best series. But I will say the best episodes are from Next Generation. And I think that's a difference in what those shows were doing. Next Generation was doing episodes. They weren't doing series. They weren't doing an arc, season-long stuff with a point at the end and, building up to things. They were doing episodes, and some of those episodes are fantastic.
Yeah.
But as a series, I think Deep Space Nine is the best.
And in terms of style, you can't top the original series.
Right?
It's just the colors,
Yeah.
everything. You.
Yeah. It's so a product of its time.
Yeah. Well, each one is definitely a product of its
Yes.
time, I think.
Right. And the original series is science fiction. It's classic short story science fiction like you'd find in those collections of sci-fi short stories from the 50s and 60s that they referenced in Deep Space Nine when Cisco
He's the writer.
believes himself to be a writer. Yeah.
That's a great episode.
That's really where Star Trek started. It was in those writers' rooms with people doing short stories for collections and newspapers.
That episode, is that his inner light moment? For Cisco, would you say?
Yeah, I would definitely say.
They've considered ending the series with going back to that, apparently, which I'm glad they didn't. But apparently they were going to, and it was all written by this guy.
I feel like that is a really incredible episode. I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm getting
There's a great fan story. No, it happened to me. It's not a fan story. It's my story. It's a fan story because it happened to a fan at Star Trek Con last time in Chicago. But the writer Morgan Gendel, who wrote the Inner Light episode of Next Generation, now handcrafts flutes, Resican flutes, which are licensed by Paramount and this, that, the other thing. So he appears at cons. He has versions of the 2 scripts that he wrote, which is Season 5's The Inner Light and Season 6 is Starship Mine, which is Die Hard on a Starship.
Yes.
It's where Picard knocks the guy out with the saddle.
Yeah, he forgets his saddle.
He forgets his saddle, got to go back. But Patrick Stewart was at that convention, and of course signed in. You can get things signed, and a fan walked up to him with her Resican flute, and he was surprised, hadn't seen it before. It's like the other thing. Was very happy to see it, and she asked him if he still knows how to play, and he wasn't sure. So to try it, he lifted the flute up and started playing, 2-3 notes. And he's having a conversation. He's very generous. He signs it. He's very happy. She walks off. Picard touched her flute, man.
Right.
He played her flute.
That's so
Awesome.
awesome.
This is an unbelievable experience that exists because of that episode, because of how it resonated, because of the actor and his geniality, his passion for it, and our passion in doing that kind of thing. So that's like my favorite Patrick Stewart moment. But I wanted to transition to Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
Great segue.
Thank you so much, right? I was like, I'm going to tell that story. That's going to work. So Patrick Stewart, that nice guy who signed that girl's flute, and also Captain Jean-Luc Picard at USS Enterprise D and E. I know it's Star Trek. Talked recently about improv, actually. In December, this was published on the website of American Theater. He wrote an article about the Chicago's own Improvised Shakespeare Company, and who he happened to run across at a benefit for, I think, Lyric Opera in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, he toured with them. He asked them to be part of their improv group. Improv not being something that he was altogether very familiar with from his training, but there's this beautiful article, I would recommend everybody go check it out, on americantheater.org about this. But can you guys talk about being fans of Star Trek, obviously, and improvisers for years and years and years, to read this article where Jean-Luc Picard is saying improv is the best?
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
When that came out, I thought it was so exciting and so cool. And I feel like improv in general is taking, there's a resurgence of like people being invested in long form improv, at least like in Chicago. There's a lot of people have moved, and the people who have stayed, these the old theater owners are reinvesting in these big pieces and are rehearsing them and putting them up, and I feel like that is so exciting. So to read somebody like him, who's just such a great actor and such a prominent person, talk about his experience with it, I thought that was very exciting.
Yeah.
And apparently Ian McKellen was talking to him about it. This is a little inside dish. Apparently, Patrick Stewart wanted to do because Improvised Shakespeare will do 2 shows a night, and it's like a 2-hour-long show,
Yeah.
And he was like, I want to do 2 in a row, and they were like, you want to do 2 in a row? He's like, yeah, I want to see what it would be like to push myself like that
Grueling.
twice in a row. What a machine! So apparently, he was talking to Ian McKellen about it, and he was like, oh, it's so invigorating and you're truly alive and you're in the moment, you should do it. And he was like, no, that sounds horrifying.
Yeah,
I'm
he's
terrified of it.
Yeah.
Forget it. I'll never improvise. I just love the 2 of them sitting around talking about improv shows.
Yeah.
And there was a night that he was at I.O., and we had a show at midnight, and he was gone, but we could feel his essence.
Yeah, he had just been
He
there.
came for the 8 o'clock, and then
We were at midnight.
Yeah.
we were like,
And of course,
did
it
he
would
hang
be,
around at the bar? I know I didn't hang around at the
Right.
bar. It would have been insane.
and how great would it be to get him someday on the show? But I know, that's what we
Just
should get.
daydreaming. We're doing the secret
Daydream.
right now.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? I do want to get Will Wheaton. That's my get someday. We'll get Will Wheaton on our show. But it's great to see Patrick Stewart embrace improv because really improv has been not always very well respected in the theater community. It's kind of the bastard stepchild of theater, and it's nice. We obviously believe that it's an important art form.
Well, even at I.O., at Second City, they improvise mostly as a means to an end to get script
produce
material.
scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference in ideology, even right down the middle of improv. In
Exactly.
Chicago.
Yeah.
in terms of its usefulness, in terms of its
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's part of how I.O. even came to exist at all.
Mhm.
Like, people thought that it could exist on its own, and a lot of people just don't feel like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it takes a lot. You have to be really good at it for it to be good on its own. But there are cases, there are instances, and Improvised Shakespeare is one of them, that is just amazing to watch it.
Improvised Star Trek is another.
It's just amazing to watch it unfold. So to have someone who's obviously so well respected in the theater and the world of theater,
and has been acting.
Yes, and is an actor, to embrace it so fully and so joyously, and to obviously be getting the same things out of it that we do, which is to feel free, to feel the possibilities unfold before you, and just the joy of being in the moment. It's really great to see him embracing it and the credence that lends to our art form.
Yeah, to have the guts to be so vocal about it too, and to write an article for American Theater Magazine.
Right.
It's just so exciting.
Yeah.
And I think all of us in the last year or two have come to appreciate Patrick Stewart on a whole other level.
Mm-hmm.
His social media game is on point.
Right.
He knows what he's doing.
All
and
that
we
stuff
love
with him and Ian McKellen just palling around in bowler hats.
Him having a slice of pizza.
Slice of pizza,
When his girlfriend was filming him and he was like doing an acting lesson.
Right.
We love it.
The quadruple take.
His ice bucket video too.
Oh, that was
He just
fantastic.
writes the check.
Yeah.
And sips some
Yeah.
scotch or something. In that article, though, that he wrote, he's quoted as saying, "The fundamental element of all good acting is what he experienced with Improv Shakes. It's listen, listen, listen."
Mhm.
And that's how he felt just as an actor in general,
Yeah.
and with improv it obviously rings true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you should be doing that when you're doing scripted work. You should be listening and like taking the emotional truth from your scene partner. But you have to do it in improv because you literally don't know what to do if you're not listening. You don't know what your line is if you haven't. You can't go and like and then I'll do and my crescendo will be here. Like you can't do that because you don't know what your stage is going to be until you're.
Yeah, you're not waiting for your line. You're not waiting for that person to stop talking so you can say what is written for you.
Speaking to diverge a little bit, but speaking of improv and theater, I was a theater major, have done a lot of theater in my time, and there's a classic actor's dream of the anxiety dream of that you're about to go on stage and you have never learned your lines and missed all the rehearsals and you don't know your blocking and anything like that. Yeah, and it's it's an evolution of showing up for class naked, or it's the end of the semester and you learn that there's a class that you never showed up for in the finals today, whatever. After doing improv for 15 years now, that dream has changed for me, so that it's the setup for the dream is still the same. It's opening night and I don't know my lines and I don't know my blocking and I've never been to rehearsal. Except for that it's no longer an anxiety dream because I just say, okay, well, can you tell me what do we have to, who am I, who are you, what do we have to get done in this scene, and it'll happen, it'll be all right. And you just walk out on the stage and it'll happen.
I have to just pause here and say that I have stress dreams about seeing a production and being in the audience and getting up to join. Or like speaking from the house. It makes me like really, really anxious to think about. Sorry.
Interrupting a performance.
Yeah. Oh, let me get up here. I gotta be up there.
I know what this scene needs.
Yeah.
It's a monster doctor.
Get in my mouth.
You guys have talked about improv for so long. Would you want to, by chance, I didn't tell these guys that this was going to happen, would you want to show how it's done?
Well, I don't know, we haven't rehearsed it.
The lights are on. You're on the stage or the dais, or you guys want to do?
I think we could do a brief scene.
Yeah.
Could we get from one of you fine folks in the audience here? Could we get the title of a Star Trek episode that has never existed, and we will show you a brief scene from that.
The times are changing.
The times are changing. Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm late. I forgot to set my clock back in my quarters.
You're early.
Oh, I'm early?
I mean,
Yeah, it's
you're early.
start date forward. In 2574. Start forward.
Yeah, no, galaxy rotate forward, galaxy rotate back. So it's
You're
start
early.
date. No, wait. You're not early. I'm late.
You're late?
I'm even later than you. That must be what that means.
Wait a second.
I don't even know if I'm supposed to be on bridge duty right now. Hey, what uniforms are we wearing? If you're early, you're wearing the one with the thing on top. And you're late, you're wearing the one with the color in the middle. What day is today?
Look, all I know is we're in charge of picking up whales today.
Today?
That's today?
That's today?
It's whale day, everyone.
Oh. If I had known that, I wouldn't have tried to show up late. I mean,
Do we have enough transparent aluminum to pick up whales?
I wasn't in charge of that, but yes, we do. You know what? I'm gonna say confidently, we've got all the transparent aluminum we need.
We have a replicator.
Yeah, replicator, transparent aluminum.
Replicators offline.
Oh,
Damn.
seems like you guys have this under control. Anybody object to me going back to my quarters?
I feel like I should have gotten here later.
See. All right. The times they are a changing.
Yeah. Thank
Good
you.
rest, Star Trek. Good rest.
That does actually remind me to go back to, very briefly, I considered making that a time travel scene, and that kind of goes back to what we were discussing
They never work.
before with mysteries. Much like mysteries, time travel are things where usually you kind of understand the rules at the end of it all. So I'm sorry for our example, I picked a time travel scene where none of us knew what the rules were.
Yeah.
I will say the few episodes of the podcast where you guys have done time travel have worked out
Yeah.
really well. in the
Well,
editing room.
to peek behind the scenes of the podcast a little bit, we don't produce episodes that don't work.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
That's
a lot
very
of
true.
it's a lot of work to edit out laughter and put in music. So we
Yeah.
only really pick the ones that hang together.
When we get together on a Sunday, we'll usually improvise 2 episodes, and maybe one of those will actually end up making it to air. We've probably done 5 time travel episodes, and 2 of them have ended up making it to air.
But Star Trek has so much time travel
Yeah.
that you absolutely kind of have to
Yeah.
touch that. Have to.
Oh, for sure.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our most recent one worked fairly well. Days in a Future Past, where Captain Baxter was trapped in the future. Captain Baxter and Lieutenant Lorem were trapped in the future, and everyone else was trapped in the past. And Coromite kept going back into the past over and over again. And it was
to
pretty
set
fun.
the timeline.
To set the
Yeah.
timeline right.
There's that
yeah.
great line from Ensign Greg or Lieutenant Greg. Maybe you should micromanage from the future.
Yeah.
He keeps showing up. Everything goes right. He fades away.
Yeah. Don't eat the soup. Yeah. Fading away.
So there's been 107 published episodes of the Improvised Star Trek podcast. When you guys started doing the podcast, transitioning it from the stage show, did you have any idea where it was going? How long you'd be going for? What was the real intention there with doing it?
Well, I know there are hundreds of shows like this in Chicago every year where you have a run, and then our run actually was longer than most. We got what was supposed to be a rotating slot and ended up going almost a year.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then
Was that every week for you?
yeah, every week for
Wow.
I
Midnight.
think it was 9 months or something.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And
At
usually
midnight.
what happens is like, oh, and then that's done, and then you move on to new shows. We just sort of noticed that like whenever any 2 or 3 of us got together, everyone kept being like, oh man, that was a fun show. Man, I really liked it when we were doing that show. And we sort of had the realization that there are more Star Trek fans than necessarily go to live Chicago improv shows
At midnight.
at midnight.
During the winter, was most of our run was over the winter
Yeah.
as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
we thought
Chicago's
about it.
famous 10-month winters.
Yeah, we thought about it and we're like, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Star Trek fans out there. Maybe we could reach a wider audience. And I've always wanted to do radio production. To me, there's a lot of great overlap between radio plays and improv because the audience brings so much to both. if you're listening to a radio piece, you get the cues from the actors and you get the cues from sound effects, but you're imagining all of this. The world, you're imagining that this person's holding a gun. You're imagining that they're chasing someone down the street. You're imagining the shadowy alley that they're running into. And the same is true with improv. We can indicate that that's where we are, but the audience has to bring that. The audience has to infuse that with reality for it to work right. And I just thought it seemed like a really great fit. You can also do, in both forms, you can do these jokes where, oh, it turns out I had piano on my back the entire time, and I'm going to whip it out right now and start playing. In improv, that's true because you didn't say it wasn't true previously. And everything is mimed, so it might as well be true. And the same thing can be true of a radio thing. It's not true until you say it's not true. So if you say there's been a piano here the whole time, then it's been there the whole time. And the audience has to kind of shift their view of what the reality was to accommodate this new piece of information about it. So I thought it was a great fit and was super glad that everyone was willing to sit down in the living room with microphones on and see if it worked. And it didn't at first. It took a while. It took a while to adapt to the new form.
Yeah. So I think, too, with sci-fi, anything is possible, right? So
Yeah.
that also just kind of fits where you guys are going. So now to the other tenet that was in the programming schedule for those who attended. The question, specifically, what is it about improv that inspires actors, geek and geeky actors the world over? There is something about improv, isn't it?
It does seem so.
Yeah, I think that it is just the fact that you don't need anything other than yourself, except for other people. Like, it's different from stand-up in that you need other people. There's a built-in community for it, but you really have autonomy over everything that you do and say. Like, you are in charge of what you're saying, how you're moving, but also kind of slipping into the collective. I think in general, improv attracts people who are outsiders to some extent or another. People who maybe are a little like, who break the mold in some way. Because there's no script, there's no person like telling you what to do. I think it kind of attracts a certain, what is the word that I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm going to think about it and come back with like a real sweet word.
I feel like that improv really lends itself well to people who are good observers of human nature. The comedy in improv comes from calling out and shining a light on humanity. And that's really what we're doing in Improvised Star Trek as well, is, where is the humanity of Star Trek? Where are the fallible humans? What do they look like? And I think that's a nerd geek thing as well, and a science fiction thing as well, for that matter, where you're observing human nature and looking at what's great about it, looking at what's not great about it, and being able to comment on it. And I think that draws a lot of people of that persuasion to both forms as well.
You're kind of, to borrow from Star Wars, you're kind of wondering why the stormtroopers are such terrible shots.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. You're looking at that and thinking, that doesn't quite seem right.
There must be a story there.
Yeah, exactly. What's the story there?
I think one of the things that, if you're an improviser, you are both writer and actor simultaneously, and I think nerdy, geeky kind of inclinations are to kind of nitpick apart and be like, oh, well, why is that like that? And also the fun thing is the fan fiction side of things or the cosplaying side of things is like, well, wouldn't it be cool if X happened? Wouldn't it be cool if I really want these two people to kiss. Why won't they do it?
Or put all their first officers on a bridge. Right to the death. Who wins? Who wins?
So when you're actually improvising, you're writing and directing, just do that scene. If you're wondering what would happen if a bunch of commanders made a bunch of ensigns fight, do a scene where a bunch of commanders are making a bunch of ensigns fight. And even if you don't know what happens there, that's why it's great to have a group to work with, is you just need to bring in like a germ of an idea, and everyone will be like, well, here's what would happen if that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so imaginative. Like, we can really go as far as we want to go. We can create whatever realities we want, and everybody's on board with them.
Yeah, I was going to say something to that effect too when you were talking. It's playful. Improv is play, and as an adult, there's not a lot of opportunities to make believe. As a grown up, you're not supposed to do it, but we get to do it all the time. We get to make believe. And that's an overlap with the nerd and geek community as well, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to
do that thing that you love.
Yeah,
to be in it, to be a part of it, and unquestioningly and uncritically have fun there.
That sounds like something that like our generation and maybe subsequent generation can really get behind.
Yeah.
Having fun, rejecting the existing form, and kind of finding something new. That seems to be the whole intention of a lot of people that I think are our age in our collective headspace.
Yeah.
So with that thinking, you keeping that in mind, and also how Del Close, and improv in general over the past couple of decades have really tried to grow and become more accepted, more mainstream. TJ and Dave are way helping in that. Is improv the new bold final frontier of theater? Can you see that becoming widely accepted and widely paraded the way that maybe edgy theater, or certainly every edgy TV show's edgy dramatic storytelling is currently? Could you see improv being like a next wave?
I feel like we are in that wave now, and I feel like you look at who is making entertainment now, and it's people who have improv training. Like, the idea of improv as a joke comes up on, like, 30 Rock all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Scott Adsit as the voice of Big Hero 6. There's, like, improvisers are everywhere. And what improv does to you as a creative person, or even, like, an executive, there's no way that improv will make your life any worse.
Yeah.
It only makes it better. So I feel like we are in that place of it being like a mainstream accepted thing. But the actual act of like sitting and watching long form improv, just theater in general, is sort of rebellious in a way. It's very much against like the cultural trends of you have my attention for 15 seconds, you better make it good.
Right.
We are asking the audience to pay attention for a longer span of time, and to go with us on a different path. I think I feel like there's an underground element to it, and I personally hope that it kind of stays that way. I hope that Whose Line Is It Anyway is the most like mainstream improv example we will ever have.
Yeah,
There's,
I don't think. Oh,
no, go ahead.
I don't think like WB is going to start doing like a new like hour-long long form special like after Arrow or anything. But
Old IO.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that like improv getting big involves more people coming to see live theater.
I think so too. There's also another connection between improv and like sci-fi or fantasy, which is that you can say whatever you want to say about the world in these forms. Think about like Battlestar Galactica was the first show to really talk about terrorism and how the United States handled everything after September 11th. They handled that when nobody else would touch it for like years.
Mm-hmm.
You will go back and watch that show and think about what they were talking about and when they talked about it, and it is like truly revolutionary what they did. And that is like the power of science fiction to me, and just like thinking about what like Gene Roddenberry did with the original series and like the kind of world that he wanted to present, and how he was so unapologetic about like the casting that he had. I think that you have that freedom in science fiction just like you have it in improv. This is a place where whatever your ideas are, you have the opportunity to express them in its purest form within a group. That to me is like very exciting about it, and naturally, and I think like very inherent in what makes improv good. And you think about any of those guys that you mentioned, Del Close, TJ and Dave, those guys are like punk rock, revolutionary, like badass guys. The fathers of the improvs. So I don't know. Do I want it to be more mainstream than it is? I don't know. I feel like it's sort of a rite of passage that like every college student has to take like an improv class now. But
that said, I think there's also a lot of opportunities for improv. Maybe not in direct as a form in and of itself, but there's so much call for content now, and the fact that improvisers are the writers and the performers and the directors, for that matter, themselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room out there for people who can produce good material regularly without much need, financially or otherwise. So there's a lot of opportunity for improvisers, I think.
Yeah, that's sort of like. Do you guys remember that writer's strike from 2006 or so? The improvisers as like a true resource really came about during that time, and we still see it. You go to auditions now, and they'll ask you to improvise, which is like, can you write some extra copy for us? For free?
We hire a good writer. Can you fix it?
Yeah. So improv is. I mean, if you want to be an actor, now you have to have some improv training. It's just necessary. But that doesn't mean you're a good improviser.
So I wanted to mention one more thing before we close, which is that the last Star Trek series, Enterprise, has been off the air for 10 years now, and there are a number of fan productions that are continuing to exist following that in the wake. There's Star Trek Continues on YouTube, web videos and that. But there's been certain technological advancements that have come about just in the last 10 years since Star Trek was ended. And of course, it's a show about the 24th century, but it was written in the 20th century. So there's things that they predicted, but also there's things they didn't predict, like social media. Mm-hmm. And here's something that on the Improvised Star Trek podcast I wanted to comment on, because there's Spacebook.
Yeah.
And Space Tumblr and Space Twitter. Very creative. In the name of
Facebook at least prime.
Facebook is the best. But certain characters, I know Dr. Zonelson mans her own, multiple Twitter accounts on the ship when she's supposed to be doing medical scans.
Yeah.
But can you talk about what that's like in terms of you're actually introducing current events, political, technological, into the Star Trek canon, or extended fanon, really, which is a word I heard once, the collective consciousness of the people who listen, at the very least, also fellow Star Trek fans, who are saying, yes, that is now a thing that has always existed, just in the background.
Right.
Like, I feel like Wesley would have a space page.
Yeah. Well, you almost have to. I mean, it's because this is the world we're living in, and we're commenting on that world, too. Probably more so than we're commenting on Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek is also commenting on our world. So we have to have some touchstones like that in order to be able to use the world that we know. To be, I mean, we know Facebook, we know Twitter, and it's in our everyday world all the time. So we have to be able to have some mechanism to comment on that. That was one of my favorite episodes of all time, that social media episode. I can't remember what it was called.
That's Sean's favorite episode.
Yeah.
Said,
A Space Modesty.
Space
Check
Modesty,
it out, episode 69 on the podcast.
Yeah. Turns out one of our nurses turns out to be sponsored content.
And someone shoots and kills her?
Yeah.
Crick. Never killed sponsored content. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the world of Star Trek kind of has to evolve to reflect our world. And of course they would have. We also talk about tricorders like basically they're iPhones. Mm-hmm. You can download apps onto your tricorder and have music and playlists and stuff on your tricorder. Because of course it would.
Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, you got this piece of technology in your hands. Of course it would be. If we have that now, they would have it then.
Well, and one great strength of comedy is like resolving kind of the tension between two things. So we've already got and it's just going to get tenser. Like the tension between what we imagine the future would be, and we're already off course from there. It's already not going to be like that. And so well, how do we deal with that? How do we keep this story relevant to us when we know it is kind of already grinding against the world we know? Well, you puncture that tension with a joke. Like that's how you resolve those conflicts.
I believe that's our time.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to thank
Thank
you
you
guys
all.
for Improvised Star Trek. Check out the podcast on iTunes, the website, theimprovisedstartrek.com.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming,
you
guys.
all for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
Thank you so very much.